Hello everyone and welcome to the Climate Cocktail Club. We hope you're all doing okay amidst these challenging times, and want to thank you for beaming in with us tonight for our first ever Climate Cast. So Climate Cocktail Club doesn't take too long to describe. It's climate. We give a platform for people to inspire more climate action. It's cocktail. Our events generally involve refreshments, ideally a cocktail or mocktail, and it's a club. But congratulations, you've made it into the club. Tonight, we're going to look at what the COVID-19 crisis means for climate change. Why this topic? Well, COVID-19 is not only a profound problem today, but it will certainly cast a long shadow over everything in the months, years to come. And arguably, it's already turned a lot upside down. How us humans move around the world, how we interact with our family and our neighbors, and what we eat. And maybe even our mindset, how we think about the economy, how we think about our governments. With all of the chaos and destruction that has come from and will come from COVID-19, if climate change doesn't fit in now, it never will fit in over this decade, which is so important for tackling climate change. So now more than ever, our mission to inspire climate action and connect it up must keep happening. And in that spirit, we're online for our cast, and we encourage you to get connected. So you're seeing a few comments there up on screen, and we encourage you to send anything, be it a smiley face, a link to something relevant, or hopefully some questions for our speakers as well. Go on, it'll make you feel better, and I know it will help our speakers who've given up an hour of their evening, lunchtime and morning feel better as well. But before we get to the serious stuff, we want to make sure you are sitting comfortably. So when our screens freeze or all speakers try and talk at once, you can have a nice refreshment there to hand to see you through our technical difficulties. We sent through a few climate-themed cocktails and mocktails in our reminder email, but here's one I'm going to show you in a minute. I'm going to show you how to make an espresso meltini in 1 minute, admittedly with a bit of preparation. So I've got a jam jar with some ice and a little bit of sugar, because I don't have Kahlua. So for my Kahlua, I'm doing 1 measure of rum and a bit of sugar. Then I've got half an espresso there, and then 2 measures of vodka. And then what I need to do is shake this thing for all I'm worth. And I've been assured that the frothier, the better when it comes to an espresso meltini. So, there we go. And there I have myself, in a minute, an espresso meltini. And it's not tasting bad as well. So I just want to encourage you throughout the evening to make yourself comfortable and send through some photos of cocktails that you've prepared as well. Before we get started, I just want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors. So first of all, we're delighted to have Fincovi as our partner. Fincovi, co-founded by Ray O'Neill, who, by the way, also co-founded Climate Cocktail Club. Fincovi is a global people-powered platform for wind and solar farm finances, providing specialized financial administration services to renewable energy asset owners that solves their admin problems. So if you're an asset manager or fund manager in the renewables industry or just developing a project, please reach out via Ray at fincovi.com. And secondly, hopefully you're enjoying one of those climate-themed cocktails or mocktails that we sent through. They were provided by those recipes were provided by our cocktail partner, Pernod Ricard UK, which has one of the most prestigious wine and spirit portfolios in the sector, including Absolute Vodka. Absolute believes in making as little impact on the planet as possible, and all its ingredients are sourced locally, water drawn locally, and bottles produced in southern Sweden in line with their one source philosophy. So now I'm going to introduce you to our speakers for the evening. So first of all, we've got, we'll hear from Beth Sawin. So hi, Beth.
Hey, everyone.
Beth is co-director of US-based NGO Climate Interactive. One thing that Climate Interactive has been doing lately is collecting examples of cities, states, nations, and regions who are making COVID-19 recovery plans that multi-solve for economic recovery, equity, and climate. Then we'll hear from Kingsmill Bond. Hi, Kingsmill.
Yeah. Cheers.
Kingsmill is energy strategist at UK-based NGO Carbon Tracker. Kingsmill is a financial market strategist and thinks that the recent oil market changes mean that peak emissions was almost certainly 2019 and perhaps peak fossil fuels as well. Then we'll have some Q&A with Beth and Kingsmill. And then before we end, we'll have some reflections from comedian, writer, and producer JC Kokoli. Hi,
hey,
JC.
Everybody. Hi, everyone.
Great to have you with us. And last year, so a bit of background on JC. Last year, after driving around across the US in an electric car for an Amazon Prime documentary series, The New American Road Trip, she was asked to speak at the UN about the experience and how comedy and culture can influence policy. So with all of those introductions out the way, I'm going to hand over to Beth.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Well, I'm going to start with cocktail disclosure. So even though it's only 1:30 here, I'm having a cocktail with this chocolate liqueur from Putney Mountain Winery, which is a winery about 20 minutes from where I live, and it runs off of solar power. So it seemed like totally appropriate. And all I have to do this afternoon is write a grant proposal. So maybe this will help. Thanks for having me. I think my job is just to seed a few ideas about connections between climate change and COVID-19. You know, I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes. I could speak for hours about this, and I know you all have a lot of thoughts. So I know there's a chat feature. Why don't you start getting, get some of what you're seeing as connections between these topics. And I'm actually going to focus on a third topic. I'm going to talk about social, racial, economic, and gender equity. So really three themes of climate, COVID-19, and equity. First, I'm just going to throw out a few little just like snapshots that I think encapsulate some of these connections. I don't know if anyone's calling in from the South Pacific, but if there is, then maybe you had firsthand experience of Tropical Cyclone Harold at the beginning of April. I read about that. I read about a ferry of people who were trying to escape pandemic conditions to get to somewhere safer, who were actually swept off their ferry in that tropical cyclone. And now about the recovery efforts in places like Fiji, where they're trying to keep people safe in cyclone shelters, but also making sure they don't create conditions for the virus to spread. And since we know the virus is going to be with us for, looks like 18 months to 2 years, think about hurricane season coming to my part of the world, or, the potential for another round of fires in Australia when their fire season comes around, and think about people trying to cope with those disasters while also trying to practice social distancing. So those, we talk about climate change as a threat multiplier. We're going to see it, I think, as a threat multiplier when it comes to the virus, and vice versa. Another soundbite I saw this week is that companies in California are laying off workers in clean energy and home weatherization. I think because they have their businesses going down, maybe people are pulling back on expenditures, and it's hard to figure out how to keep those workers safe. I know some of you are from those industries, so your perspective on that would be really interesting. But there's a way in which the virus is making it harder to do the work that we know we need to do to protect the climate for the future. Lots of people have remarked about reduced air pollution in cities all over the world as cars sit idled in driveways, airplanes aren't flying, the skies are clearer. Nobody's celebrating that. It's not the way that we want to clean up our environment, but it is a way in which the virus kind of holds up a mirror where we see how our energy and transportation systems affect our lives every day. Did anyone see the headline? I saw it this morning. China has put something like 10 more gigawatts of coal online, more than they did, I believe, all of last year, part of jumpstarting their economy. So they're now trying to respond to the economic impacts of the pandemic by relaxing environmental protections. So, progress on COVID, again, maybe lack of progress or even backsliding on climate. Now we're seeing photographs of barges full of oil off the coast of California, off of Singapore. I saw a map this morning with little red dots everywhere. Kingsmill might have more to know about that than I do, but this oil oversupply exceeding storage because there's been such a hit to demand. Then in many parts of the world, we hear talk about stimulus plans and advocates saying there's ways to address these three issues of equity, climate, and the pandemic together. Maybe we can make progress on them all together. And we hear about cities that are experimenting with opening up streets, banning cars so that people have more space to be outdoors, but still physically distant and safe. And through all of this, we see the economic hits hitting the same groups of people, right? The marginalized groups by whatever scheme it is in each society, whether it's race or class or gender or economic class. We know that climate disasters hit the most marginalized people the hardest. We're seeing the same thing with health disparities and how the virus is hitting people. So I've been writing and speaking about these connections, and I try to emphasize every time I do that, three things. The first is that there's two risks if we don't tackle these three problems together. The three problems of climate change, inequality, and COVID-19. The first risk is that the way we go about solving one problem makes the others worse. And in those snapshots, you probably heard a couple examples of that, right? Whether it's a country relaxing its environmental protections in order to boost economic recovery, right? So you're solving the economic impacts of the pandemic, hooray, but actually you're doing it at the cost of another existential problem, climate change, not so good. The stay-at-home orders that we're all participating in all over the world are actually having a great deal of success in flattening the curves. Fewer people are dying because we're doing that. Hooray, right? We're taking action to help on the pandemic. But more and more we're seeing where that's hitting the hardest is the most marginalized and vulnerable workers. The ones who can't work from home, the ones who might still have to risk their safety. So the potential is that we emerge from these pandemics with fault lines of inequality in our societies actually made worse by how we responded to the health aspect. So that's the first risk. We make progress on one front and it actually has negative impact on the other front. The second risk is related, but it's a little bit different, which is that if we set aside one of these problems, it will just come back to erode whatever progress we made on the others. So around me, I live in Vermont in the US. We're a state full of small businesses and small farms. A lot of efforts being put into keeping those small businesses alive through this pandemic. That's incredible. If we take our eye off the ball of climate change, what's going to happen is the potential for small businesses that made it through the pandemic to get wiped out by the next flood, the next hurricane, the next fire season. And so all of that investment of time, of money, of heartache into getting through one problem, totally at risk if we don't address the other problems. And I could go on with those examples, but I hope you sort of see the themes. So those are the two risks. And the good news is that to balance the risk, the third thing I talk about is an opportunity, which is that there are ways to address these three issues together that actually might make all of them easier to solve. And at Climate Interactive, we call that approach multi-solving. And it kind of goes against some instinct in many of us. Each one of these problems, climate change, COVID-19, inequality, feels overwhelming on its own, right? Like I could devote a whole career to any one of those and maybe still not see it solved in my lifetime. And then here you are, Beth, at Climate Interactive saying, that's not good enough, actually tackle them together. It's already overwhelming and I should pile more on. Well, actually, yes, that is what we're saying. That's what our research is showing, that there's a certain category of problem that actually is easier to solve by virtue of lumping it together. Because doing that mobilizes more political will, bigger constituencies, bigger budgets. It's tricky. It requires a kind of cross-sectoral collaboration that we're not used to. But I continue to feel like it's our best way forward out of these intersecting crises. And Alex mentioned at the beginning at Climate Interactive, one way we think we can contribute in this moment is to track all the innovative ideas we can find from around the world of where people are doing just that, or putting forth either as ideas or open letters or actual endorsed policies, these multi-solving approaches at the intersection of climate, pandemic, and inequality. So our website is climateinteractive.org, and at the top of the menu bar there, you'll find a link that says something like Green Equitable Stimulus Plans. So you can check out what we have there. We're always wanting to hear more, so send us what we've missed that you know about. And maybe I'll just close out. I can't tell you everything on this list. Fortunately, it's growing every day, which is really exciting. But maybe a few examples from different scales. And I may talk about places where some of you are calling in from. So would love to know more about what the view on the ground is from those places. At the city level, we hear that Amsterdam is committed to their recovery following the idea of donut economics, which I bet many of you are familiar with, especially since it originates in the UK with Kate Raworth's work at Oxford. So planning the recovery around a balancing of the needs of people, the needs of an economy, and the fact of ecological limits, including climate. We're seeing cities all over the place. I mentioned this a minute ago, who are closing parts of their cities down to automobile traffic. There was an article that got a lot of play yesterday about the capital city in Lithuania, Vilnius, opening the city center to restaurants. They're going to put forth that every restaurant table needs to be 2 meters apart. On tiny streets and in tiny buildings, you can't get too many tables in there. And so they're saying we'll have an open air park and a system for restaurants to sort of requisition space to put their tables up. So people can go back to their socializing, and restaurants have this way to be open, and we can all stay safe. Not far from me in Burlington, Vermont, the municipal electric utility has a stimulus plan in response to the virus that focuses on things like on-bill solar, home energy weatherization, incentives for electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging. So they're saying their contribution to helping their city recover is through a whole package of policies that will also be really good for the climate. We're hearing countries like Germany, Switzerland, New Zealand, presidents and prime ministers talking about, and other places, talking about the recovery, really needing to weave these threads together. In the South Pacific, I was talking about the impact of a tropical cyclone at the beginning. They've also come out, the South Pacific Island Forum, with quite a strong statement about linking recovery from the pandemic to preparedness for future pandemics and preparedness for climate change. And so there's no lack of creativity, but I think what we have to acknowledge is at the same time, we know that the fossil fuel industry is also seeing this moment of instability and multi-potentiality, and lobbying for policies like environmental protection rollbacks that help their industries. And so the last thought I would leave you with is, I feel like we are in a moment that could go in many directions. And to some extent, it's going to depend on how each of us show up as citizens and as professionals. Are we raising our voices? Are we using our votes? Are we using our professional skills to make sure that the way we come out of the pandemic is shaped by the full potential that we all know of the fields of like clean energy, energy efficiency, ecosystem-based adaptation, and all the other sort of wonderful things that our field is ready to bring to the world. So I don't know which way it's going to come out, but I certainly know where I'm putting my time every day in these perilous times, is trying to steer it towards what I think is the best direction for people and for the planet. So thank you.
Fantastic, Beth. Thank you very much. And really comprehensive, looking at the risks of not tackling these crises together, as well as the opportunity and some actions that are out there as well. So really grateful for that. And next up, let's go to Kingsmill, and then we'll go for some Q&A. I just want to acknowledge we've already had some fantastic comments in and questions, so do keep them coming, and we'll cover them in 10 minutes time. So thanks I think we've had 60 odd already, so really appreciate getting those in. Kingsmill.
Brilliant, thank you very much, and thanks Beth for the inspiring ideas, and I just want to build on that a little bit. So I think I have a message of hope. And the message of hope is because the worst is past, I would suggest. Not the worst of the virus, but the worst of the old fossil fuel system. And to substantiate that, you think for a moment about what the UK did in 1942. So just after the worst of the Second World War was past, that was the moment when the Beveridge Report was conceived and written, setting out the foundation of the modern welfare state in the United Kingdom, when the NHS was conceived. And then these plans were put into place after the end of the Second World War. So it's often at times of crisis and greatest stress that we can actually drive and achieve change. And the other kind of framing comment I'd like to make by way of introduction is think about the European electricity sector, which was dominated by coal and natural gas all the way through until about 2007. And then the financial crisis came and struck it in 2007. And actually, that was the moment of peak demand for fossil fuels for electricity generation in Europe. And after that, wind and solar came much more easily into the system and completely transform the system afterwards. So I think at these times of greatest difficulty and stress, we must recognize that there are also times of crisis, of opportunity. So specifically on this energy transition, there are three reasons why I'm quite optimistic that we've seen peak demand for fossil fuels. And the first is simply maths. So we're getting a big shock right now, and it looks like demand this year is going to fall by about 6% for fossil fuels. And then we'll probably bounce back maybe halfway next year. So you're still going to be about 3% below where you were in 2019. And this is a sector which is only growing under normal circumstances at less than 1% a year. So the point simply is that by the time you get back to 2019 levels, actually all of the new energy technologies of solar and wind and batteries will have grown large enough to do what they did to electricity in Europe in 2008 and take all of the growth. And I think therefore we need to think in terms of the worst is behind us, the moment of peak emissions and probably the moment of peak fossil fuel demand. Again, it slightly depends on how you play the maths. The second thing, which is very different, before I even think about the way we all may be living differently, it is the question of the prestige of the fossil fuel industry. You've got to realize that the primary force within most societies blocking change to a world powered by renewables is not actually economics, it's not financial markets, it's not technical possibilities, it's the incumbents. And now the incumbents are on their knees. So they're coming cap in hand to governments, they're asking for money, and that radically changes their power and their ability to continue to frustrate and block change. And then that then brings me to the third thing that's quite different and special now, which is that governments have a lot more power to drive change. So many companies and many organizations are now coming to government looking for support, the airline industry, the car industry, parts of the fossil fuel industry. And that gives governments the chance now actually to decide who should get the cash and what kind of a world do we want to build. And what's totally different to 2008 is the fact that the cost of renewables is down by about 90%, or 94% to be specific for solar. And what that means, therefore, is that these new technologies are the cheaper, not just better for the planet, but also cheaper technologies that governments can now deploy. And as they seek to kickstart growth in their economies, they are going to be putting money into these cheaper, faster, cleaner local technologies. And to pick up on what Beth said, because a lot of people are saying, well, how about the fact that plastic bag bans are being repealed in the US? How about the repeal of legislation on various different pollutants that the incumbents are pushing through? I think you need to distinguish between what happens in the short term, which is a kind of knee-jerk reaction by people with their finger, as it were, on the trigger, and what happens in the medium term, which is when informed policymakers have to make reform-based decisions. And the argument that we would make at Carbon Tracker is that as policymakers, particularly in fossil fuel importing countries, seek to decide how and where to stimulate, then they will enact policies similar to those advocated by Lord Stern, which are policies which are both beneficial for the economy and beneficial for the environment, to solve 2 out of 3 of Beth's comments, and one would hope also beneficial for equity as well, to solve all 3 of them. Let me conclude with some thoughts on where do we go now, and if we're right and we've seen peak fossil fuel demand, we're going to have a very, very long period of perennially high levels of overcapacity for fossil fuels, and therefore low prices, and therefore the industry will continue to be weak and on the back foot. And at the same time, the opportunity now lies in the hands of governments and campaigners to actually go out there and build the world that we want to build. So my concluding remark really is that it really, as Alex said right at the beginning, is now or never for us to achieve the change that we want. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks very much, Kingsmill. Really appreciate those thoughts. So now what we're going to do is we're going to read out some of the questions that we've had in. So thank you very much for sending them. Keep them coming. So we've had one from actually I think we'll start with this one from Olivia. So you both alluded to this. Corporates are already lobbying to ensure government support to their own recovery, supposedly back to a carbon intensive normal. How can we build an effective societal green lobby to counter that? And thanks to Olivia for that question. Who wants to go first on that one?
Well, I can offer a couple ideas, and then I'm curious what Kingsmill thinks. One thing I didn't have a chance to talk about in the beginning is a third factor. So we're talking climate, COVID, equity. The other one is health, which connects to air pollution. And so I believe there's just a huge untapped synergy that's both economic and financial and about what people care about. And I think this is something we can capitalize on in the fact that our capital cities around the world are experiencing, low air pollution, sometimes for the first time in people's lives. And therefore people are breathing easier. There's fewer asthma cases. That's making, the research that we've always known about. The World Health Organization had a report in 2018 that said the level of savings from being on a path to the Paris Agreement from health was, in terms of dollars, the same amount as the cost of being on that path. And very few people, in my experience, know that. So we already have it in the analysis in the peer-reviewed literature, but now people are experiencing it. And so I think Olivia is right that it is down to political will, it's down to people power versus vested interests. And I think an untapped alliance that we really should try to move on is the connection between air pollution, health, and fossil fuels, and making those links clearer to people and continuing to build. I think good work is underway, but continuing to build the connections between those different constituencies.
Great. And Kingsmill, what are your thoughts on this?
No, I think that's a brilliant summary of the situation. I mean, the only other point I would make is that we should be bringing to our policymakers shovel-ready projects for green stimulus, which will make it much easier for them to implement them. Again, as Lord Stern has been saying. But yeah, I also want to highlight this report that Irina wrote that came out last week, saying that it would be the benefits of implementing a green energy system would be 6 times higher than those of carrying on with the current fossil fuel system. And then the final point I'd make, again, to pick up on Beth, is that don't forget that 4 out of 5 people live in countries that import fossil fuels. So when you're talking about the political economy of continuity versus change, you've got to remember that if you're in Vilnius or Dublin or the United Kingdom or Germany or most countries, basically, you would do much better, and your country would do much better to get its own homegrown local energy and not to import fossil fuels.
Great. Okay.
Alex, could I add just one more point to what I said? Many of you probably also saw a study that came out of Harvard about 2 weeks ago that looked at increased mortality from COVID-19 connected to air pollution. So basically they found a really strong correlation. You're much more likely to die of COVID-19 if you've lived in a neighborhood. And often, it's people who lack political power who live in these neighborhoods hard hit by air pollution. So there's another argument. Air pollution was already a very strong argument. If we know that we're facing maybe a period of years before we have a vaccine, we're literally talking also about saving people from the virus by keeping air pollution down. And I think that just needs to be said over and over and over again.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question in from Jenny. How do we create a vision of the way we can live using these changes in our lives as a springboard? And who are the writers, scientists, politicians, business artists, non-profits, or spiritual leaders with those visions? Or maybe who are the ones that you've been, who are the ones you've been tuning into?
Kingsmill, you want to take a first cut?
Sure. I mean, it's been really nice having less commuting time and hearing from many more people. And so there's a wide range of people, I think, who are setting out a completely different vision for the kind of world that we can have. So people like Matthew Hall, who's a writer, our spiritual leaders, people like Greenpeace. I guess they've been saying this for a very long time, but it feels to me now that actually all of the arguments that they've been making for all of these years are now being totally vindicated, and we should be listening to them all the more.
Yeah, I agree with that. One thing I think people I hope are seeing from COVID-19 it kind of sheds light on a debate that we have in the climate field too, right? Which is sometimes there's on the one hand, there's individual action. So like lifestyle changes, we should all be trying to lower our carbon footprint. And on the other side is collective change, like different infrastructure. And in the last few years, I think the climate movement has gotten really clearer and clearer about saying, yes, individual action is important, but there's no way to live a low carbon lifestyle truly in a society that's built around fossil fuels. And that it's not a matter of our own personal virtue. And in fact, that's a little bit of a red herring, and in some ways plays into the hands of vested interests. I learned not too long ago that the first carbon calculator was created by BP. And you can see, why they might be happy for us all to be, thinking we're not doing good enough because we're still producing greenhouse gases in how we go about our lives. And, we're starting to see the same thing in, can we keep each other safe from COVID-19? People ought to stay home. Well, someone who doesn't have a social safety net may have to go to their job anyway. They may be feeling sick. And if in my country, they may not have paid sick leave, right? In the United States, lots of people don't. And so the kind of limitations of addressing these complex problems via just individual action or individual virtue is just becoming more and more exposed, I think, the sort of fallacy of that argument. And so on the one hand, I really like Jenny's question. In my own life, some of the greatest pleasures I have are pretty low carbon activities. I love my little electric car. I have a garden and a super insulated house, and I enjoy all those things. But I also understand that my whole society can't move by individual actions alone. So in a way, it kind of pulls me back to the first question about building collective power to get the kind of infrastructure that we actually deserve. We deserve, in fact, to be able to live our lives and take care of our families without closing down options for future generations. And as Kingsmill's been saying, the technologies are there, we know what to do, and it really is political will.
Great, thank you both. A couple of questions now that are, a bit more kind of specific. So one was the one that came up earlier, which is, what's the effect of COVID-19 on the UN climate process? And then another one that came in was around carbon pricing. So what might be with the fossil fuel price, changes and fluctuations, how might that affect global carbon pricing schemes, which, so Kingsmill, would you want to have a stab at any of those?
Sure. Shall I take the second and defer to you, Beth, on the first? So fossil prices are very low, and as a result, the global price of carbon has fallen through the floor of carbon pricing schemes. I think we've got to realize, just to put a bit of context around this, we as a society dramatically undertax carbon. To give you the stats from the OECD, we tax oil and petrol and diesel at 86 euros a ton, and we tax everything else in our society at 3 euros a ton. And that's an absolute outrage for given that a ton of carbon dioxide is causing at least 100 euros of damage. It's an absolute outrage. So we need to have a complete and radical change in the way that we tax everything. And this may also play into the question of equality, because there are now a few people out there talking specifically now about a carbon tax and dividend system. So what you would do, same as everything else in society, if you want to minimize use of something, like pollution, you put a proper price on it. So what we should be doing is putting a price on this stuff, gathering the money in, and then redistributing it to people on low incomes. So actually it becomes an extremely fair and equitable and economically intelligent thing to do. And I mean, as you know, there are forces like Ted Halstead who are pushing this in the US, and there are forces who are pushing it in Europe as well. But I think now is the moment for a tax and dividend system. And don't forget, all these global carbon pricing schemes, not all of them, but many of them were set up as compromises in the face of implacable opposition by fossil fuel incumbents. Well, now they're on their knees. Let's put in a proper system. Let's just say, right, $50 a ton across the economy. Everyone, all the users, all the polluters have got to pay. That's it. All the money we get in, which incidentally is not an impossible amount. It's about, in Europe at least, about $500 per person per annum, gets redistributed to the poor. And let's build a new world.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Kingsmill. Beth, do you want to take, go for this one?
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, COVID-19 already has had an impact on COP26 by pushing it back a year. I don't want to oversimplify, but in a way, I feel like it all comes back to the first question. I think it was from Olivia about like, how do we build people power? Because at the end of the day, COP26 is about governments. All right, I'll tell you a funny story about my time at different COPs. Once when I was a young, earnest computer modeler trying to bring increased ambition to the COPs, I was interviewing a delegate from a country, and I said, what else could we add to our computer models that would show the negotiators the importance of ambitious action? And this negotiator kind of patted me on the shoulder, and what she said was, at the end of the day, the thing that negotiators worry about is how far can they go before their president or their prime minister loses the next election. And this was probably 10 years ago, and it's stayed with me ever since. And so this moment could be a moment where we allow negotiators to go further by the extent to which we're organized, that we've drawn these connections between health, equity, and climate. We're clear that the moment is now to make these transitions, to the extent that within countries, citizens are aligned to make this transition. That opens up room to move in the negotiations. The other option, I think, is that we retreat into fear. It feels like it's too much to handle. We just want things to, quote, go back to normal. And then it seems like that could be quite a drag on ambitions. So I think this sounds trite, but it's kind of up to us with our different roles at the different scales where we find ourselves.
Great. Well, thank you both very much. We're going to pause our Q&A there. And yeah, if we could get 100 odd people clapping at once for you both digitally, we would try and do that now, but unfortunately we can't. So, well, there we go. We have the digital equivalent for you at the bottom. So big thanks to Jenny, Olivia, Connie, and Mohammed for those questions. And now we're going to queue up for our final slot, JC Cockley. So let's bring her back in. And good morning, JC.
Hi.
And
I cannot hear Alex at all, so I hope I have been introduced and I'm not stepping on this dialogue. Great. I need everyone that can hear me to give me a thumbs up. Kingsmill, good. Oh, thank the heavens. Okay, Climate Cocktail Club. Hello. JC Cockley here from the beautiful California state inside the United States, where we recommend you drink bleach to solve the COVID-19 crisis. It's very simple. You could get it at your local market. You just want to add a little bit of vodka to it, mix it up with a couple of ice cubes, take it down the hatch. Solves everything. Some of you might be wondering why I'm here. Physically here on Earth, I don't have the answer. It's only been quite a miserable run thus far, but we're making do. But why I'm outside is because I have a plethora of very kind and thoughtful Mexican men fixing the inside of my house. I thought it was going to be 2. There's about 15 of them. So they now live in my home, and I now live in the outdoors, which is how it should be, to be honest with you. And what a great segue into the climate crisis. Why I'm here, and I'm so grateful to be here, is because I was supposed to be in London with you guys enjoying a cocktail, which, don't worry, I have put inside my reusable water bottle, not just for water. It could be for anything. Gin, straight. That's how I drink my cocktails. I just pour the bottle in, and I also take that down the hatch. But no, it's 11:15 in the morning right now, so I can't necessarily drink like the rest of you are doing. But I love that Beth is going to be writing a grant paper after this, after having some delicious wine. I would love to see that copy when you're done with it, Beth. Just like a bunch of LOLs in it. That's how I write my grants to the Rockefeller Foundation. Just a little bit tipsy. You know what I mean? That's how you get the money. When you're drunk enough to be bold, that's how we solve the climate crisis. And to pivot, a bit and to bounce off what Beth and Kingsmill are saying, it's like, this is a prime time right now. And I know it sounds trite, but here in the United States, why I had been working so much is because I did this cross-country road trip in an electric car from San Francisco to New York City through the middle of America. Now, I'm not sure if you are familiar with the middle of America, but they are a wily bunch. They are a wily bunch indeed. And they are working for climate solutions more impressively than I think the rest of us here in the United States thought was happening. They are utilizing their wind turbines in Kansas. They are understanding how the heat from the sun in Las Vegas can be a solar economical boost for them. So it's not just strippers and steaks, it's also solar. You know what I mean? I can't hear anybody laughing, but I assume people are barreling over right now. I have never done comedy to a muted audience. So there is nothing funnier than me just screaming. Okay, yeah, emojis help, Beth. Thank you. Yes, emojis. Just send me emojis and let me know if it's good, because otherwise I'll go inside and introduce you to every sweet painter that's inside my house right now as a hit. So I want to talk about COVID-19 in California and how we are comedically at a crossroads right now where half of California, it's not even half, let's be honest, it's just Huntington Beach where you can drink like 4 Monster energy drinks in a row instead of water. But some of California wants to open, some of California doesn't want to open. I say listen, now don't get mad at me. The ones that want to go out, let them go out. And then we get to be named the beneficiary to their funds. Is that a bad idea? I think that's a great idea. If you want to go out, we get all of your real estate. We get all of your everything that was supposed to go to your kids. We get the climate people. So if you want to go and test it, you want to go out there and risk your life, man, for America, then we get all your shit. Am I allowed to say shit? I'm allowed to say shit. Kingsmill, are you laughing? Okay, good. Kingsmill's laughing.
I'm liking it.
So obviously, we here in the United States are dealing with a different version of stuff, but we have to stay conscious of what policy is doing while we're in these lockdowns too, because us people that are in lockdown following the rules, there's these sneaky little political bastards out there signing paperwork and changing policies to make sure that all these environmental laws that we were putting into place get turned back, and we got to keep an eye on them. So that's why I propose we will toilet paper the houses of any politician, because you know how toilet paper is in abundance right now, because I hoarded it all. But we will toilet paper all the politicians' houses who are taking back environmental policies. Nothing says don't fuck with the planet like an entire front yard of Charmin. You know what I mean? Do you guys have Charmin there? I always wonder. Thank you, Anna. People are sending emojis letting me know it's working, and that's all that matters. I also know that being here in California, what I'm doing best here is Eric Garcetti, our mayor here in Los Angeles, has taken on his own Green New Deal here in the city. And we are moving forward to a plan in 2030 and 2050. Now, let's be honest. Can we just say the truth here? 2050, first of all, Kingsmill is going to be dead. And then what happens, right? Kingsmill, that's the joke. You're going to be fine. I'm going to be dead. Let's be real. I'll be dead by 2050. I've done enough organic cocaine for the rest of us. So I know for a fact that the truth of the matter of taking mayors and governors and politicians in general's responsibility seriously is moving mountains. You know, the Los Angeles city, we used to have an above ground trolley. They used to take people to and from. And that can run on electrical power. And that got, demolished by the car industry. And that's fine. It's all well and good. But this is that time, right, Beth? You had said it before that we're starting to see the effects of COVID-19 and we're not celebrating them necessarily. But at the same time, clean air. Okay, is that too much to ask to just be able to breathe a bit? I grew up in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Steel City, coal town. I had a couple of coal miner boyfriends in my day. Sure did. Made out with a couple of coal miners. Have you ever done that? You ever made out with a coal miner? They have no teeth, and that's fine. You just get your tongue in there and just lick their gums like an ice cream cone. Is that too much? But you guys are drunk, so you probably like this. That's what I'm saying, though. I like a guy that can dig, me and elements. But I don't want you going out there destroying the planet. So when I have my 15 babies, because I'm fertile, I'm a fertile beast. When I have 15 babies, I don't want them coughing all over the place because coughing is going to be illegal in 2021. Do you know that? There's a policy out there. I'm proposing it, but it's a policy where no one's allowed to cough anymore. And I'm also going to double down and propose that humans don't fart anymore because of the methane issue. It's going through, I'm gathering lobbyists now because if we stop this farting that's happening, we'll probably cool this planet down. And that's my take on things, guys. It's the methane issue, right? I just had a great conversation with Secretary John Kerry yesterday about World War Zero and what they're doing here in the policy of the United States and across the globe. And they're getting people from all walks of life, everybody that they can, from both sides of the aisle, to be a part of something for the first time ever, to say, hey, we're going to all dive in together. Comedians, sergeants, lieutenants, tiny animals. I don't know if they're going to take on tiny animals, but they should. I mean, tiny animals lobbying. Could you imagine like a little baby cat, like holding policy for a greener future? Nobody can get mad at a tiny baby cat. I mean, maybe some people could get mad. There's a lot of non-cat people. Beth likes that joke. I don't know if these laughing emojis are delayed, but if they aren't, you guys are killing it in real time. So what I talked to John Kerry about is, and I can call him John, I actually referred to him as Farmer John, and he told me not to say that again. And so I'll listen to him. You always got to listen to an old white man, you know what I mean? Otherwise, they take you back and they lock the door, you know what I mean? Just kidding. Me too. You too. Us too. You too. Great band. So I'm back now. So we were talking about methane and how composting is what he's getting into. John Kerry's getting into composting, you guys. And now I know every person's individual action is not necessarily going to move methane out of the atmosphere, but it is a starting point to how the United States gets rid of its trash and waste. There are so many homes and families here that don't understand how to sift food from one bag to another because it's just not a part of our system. And the landfills get filled up and that gets burned. Methane gets in the atmosphere. Of course, it's not as strong as CO2, but at the same time, it's definitely more lethal because it traps heat more. So if we can get humans to stop farting, cows to stop farting, and then people to learn how to sift their trash, problem solved. Why am I not the president of the United States? Kingsmill, am I saying facts correctly or no?
Yeah, no, you've cracked it. You've definitely cracked it, JC.
Thank you. Thank you, Kingsmill. I have cracked it. I just don't get what the problem is. Then we have to wait till 2050 for that idea. I just came out with that in 2021 in the back of a parking lot. Don't tell me things are hard. Also, and to pivot onto Greenpeace, let's talk about Greenpeace, because you're right, Kingswell. The spirituality of what they have been doing is top notch. And we have all kind of watched them do their crazy antics for a long time. You know what I mean? I appreciate a good Greenpeace advocate. Here's why. They're always shirtless and attractive, which is, you know, two prerequisites, in my opinion. Shirtless, attractive men that are always like handcuffing themselves to a pipeline casually on a Tuesday. That's what we need, is people to be just handcuffing themselves to things. And why not? You're trying to save the planet, and in real time, the idea. My mom just called. My mom literally just called in the middle of the show. Am I still on? Okay, good. My mom just called. My mom, sweet mom, Bev, she was the one I introduced me to the coal miner. You obviously, Bev from Pittsburgh. But listen, I gotta go. You gotta wrap things up. You understand how serious this is and why laughing about certain things helps people digest the information and move forward as quickly as possible into policy. Because it's not that we're running out of time. Look, we got nowhere to go. We're all trapped as hell right now. We're trapped as hell, okay? But we have the opportunity to really lobby in these environments, because these other people, look, the policy owners and the old rink-a-dink fossil fuel people that wear suspenders and they have their big tummies, I don't know, they could get COVID, okay? So we have to move while they are potentially staying inside. That's all I have to say. I think I just offered to murder some fossil fuel people, but that's not what I was saying. All right, that's it.
Thank you very much, JC, for your contribution there. Really appreciate that. Just a final couple of notices from me. So first of all, want to give a huge thank you to the three of you for beaming in and giving us an hour of your evening, lunchtime and morning. And so huge thank you to you all. I also just want to very briefly say thanks to some of the volunteer team at Climate Cocktail Club. And so what I'm going to do is welcome up a few of the characters who've put together this ensemble. So first of all, we've had Beth England. So Beth Sawin was not the only Beth on show today. So Beth has been moderating and passing through some of the questions from Facebook and YouTube. We've also had Anna, who is there with her cocktail, which is good on you. So Anna really got the ball rolling with this and asked Beth Sawin to speak, and that got us into motion. And then finally, Indra, who again with another lovely cocktail in the hand. So Indra put together this broadcast by doing a bit of research on some of the platforms and some of the graphics as well. So those are just three of the London Climate Cocktail Club volunteer team, and we encourage you to get in touch and join our team. We also encourage you to suggest a webinar, suggest a speaker, or even a software that will help us connect our clubbers during these socially distanced times. So with all of that, we want to thank you very much for beaming in, and yeah, we hope you come along to the next one, and we'll see you very soon. So thanks all.